met early on in 2011, I think it was. I was just getting started. I had just gotten out of the Army and I wanted to be an investor, and you were just getting started as a realtor and wanting to work with investors. So it was this really, really, I guess, symbiotic relationship, and it worked really well for us. But you weren't the first realtor that I worked with. There were some others, and
What?
I did. I know.
Were you cheating on me,
Sorry.
Kirby?
I wasn't going to say anything, but none of them were as good as you before I met you. So
okay.
So yeah, so that's my point, is that I worked with some others and I struggled to find any deals. But as soon as we started working together, there was, we clicked. We had the same mentality. You understood where I was coming from, and we started doing deals right away. And so,
yeah,
I guess I want to get into some of the differences, but how, I guess, in your mind, what's the difference between working with a retail client and an investor, and how do you separate that in your mind?
Well, it's completely different, honestly. I think you've seen over the years that my business hasn't been pigeonholed to being only investors, and I've done that on purpose to diversify my lead generation sources. I feel like I had maybe a similar opportunity as Steve Budzik when we were getting started, but I chose not to go down that route.
In terms of like him primarily focusing on investors.
Yeah. Being in your office every day and that being his own method of generating business. So I like having the variety of different types of people, because if investors are wearing me out, I can focus somewhere else. If retail buyers are wearing me out, I'll stop focusing on them and
yeah.
whatever. So I think that's worked out really well for me to have kind of a really good real estate practice. But last year, out of 120 transactions, 52 of those were with investors. So it's a pretty significant portion, about 43%. So I definitely enjoy working with investors for a reason.
Yeah. And one of those was a deal we did together. It was an apartment building that was just, vacant, ugly.
Yeah.
And you sent it to me because you're always just on the lookout for that type of deal, something that there's a lot of value add opportunity, and you're willing to kind of search out who owns it and find out the general information that I would need as an investor. And so I always appreciate that. And so, it turned into a deal for us, and then potentially a sale on the back end if we end up selling it. So,
right.
So I think that's the other advantage too for agents, is that you a lot of times get a couple transactions out of the process, and then obviously investors are constantly buying. But what would you say some of the pros and cons are to working with investors?
Well, I think a pro and a con is that it's not an emotional decision, right? So it's just based on the numbers. If the numbers work, then let's move forward. If they don't, then let's move on. Let's find something else. So that's a beautiful thing, because I've learned ways to analyze my entire MLS and break it down by price per square foot. Let's say I'm looking for a flip property. I might look in a specific area or county and sort every property on the market by the lowest price per square foot, and then go back and run an analysis to see which of them actually have the resale value to find flips. So I like the analytical approach, and the downside is that even if you have a property that fits the numbers, it might not fit every investor's numbers and the way they look at things. So building those relationships is a huge advantage, because then I know who's the most likely investor to actually transact versus the ones that are just kicking tires. So
yeah, that's a good point. And I think there's ways that agents can sort of turn off investors, and there's ways investors can really, sort of piss off agents and give investors a bad name, and I think an
Yeah.
example is like, for a investor, they reach out to an agent and they say, I'm looking for all the, this specific type of property. And then the agent sends them things that don't make any sense financially. They're all emotional
Yeah.
triggers. And then vice versa, an investor could reach out to an agent and say, I'm looking for this type of property. The agent sends them a whole bunch of properties and then they go silent. They don't even, this agent just spent hours putting together this list of potential deals and they don't respond to them. And then they say, well, these agents, they're not, I can't work with them because they're not great to work with. And they're just at the same time, they're pissed off because the investor doesn't even respond when they spend all this time on it. So
Kirby, you know how many investors that I sent information on your apartment building that never responded after I sent them financials and all of this financial information? Like, it took so much time to put that information together.
yeah.
And I've probably sent it to hundreds of investors that reached out to me and they never responded with an email or a phone call or anything. It is incredible.
Yeah, it's crazy. And if they responded, then at least you understand what they're looking for. And maybe you have another deal down the street that fits their criteria. It's just crazy that people are so transactional. So